What you're about to hear is one of the most disturbing, layered, and still unresolved disappearances from the entire Cold War era. A decorated young Army lieutenant who had everything going for him. Youth, an engagement, a promising career, simply walked off base for what should have been a casual drink. He vanishes without a trace. 5 weeks later, his car is discovered 500 miles away in the heart of Death Valley. The engine is burnt out, cigarette butts litter the ground even though he had never been a smoker, and his personal items have disappeared. His barracks room had been stripped clean overnight. The Army first labels him a deserter, then suggests a mental breakdown, and later claims he was killed in action in a country he never visited. His brother spent decades fighting for answers through Freedom of Information Act requests, congressional assistance, and formal hearings, only to pass away without ever learning the truth. Was Paul dying from secret radiation exposure during atomic tests? Was he quietly recruited by the CIA for a high-risk mission over Laos? Or was he silenced because he knew too much about classified human experiments? This is not merely a missing persons case. It's a window into the darkest corners of 1950s America, where patriotism collided with paranoia and men like Paul Whipkey became expendable. If you're ready for a complete, no-holds-barred breakdown that includes new details, competing theories, and connections most channels overlook, smash that like button right now if you're already interested. Before we reach the disappearance itself, it's important to understand exactly who Paul Byron Whipkey was, because every piece of evidence suggests he was not the kind of man who would simply vanish on his own. Paul was born April 25, 1932 in the coal mining suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His father worked hard in the mines, and the family instilled strong values of duty, honor, and perseverance. Paul excelled in school and in sports. He was intelligent, athletic, and deeply patriotic. After high school, he enlisted in the Army and rose quickly through the ranks thanks to his dedication and skill. By the age of 26, he had become a first lieutenant. He was also a qualified pilot and served as a company commander at Fort Ord, California, one of the Army's largest training bases on the West Coast. He was engaged to be married and had a bright future ahead of him. His friends and fellow officers described him as reliable, ethical, and the kind of person you could trust in any situation. His commanding officer at Camp Desert Rock, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Lewis, later stated that Paul's actions were always ethical both on and off base. He had no debts, no scandals, and no warning signs of trouble. But that's when everything changed in 1957 when Paul received temporary duty at Camp Desert Rock in Nevada. He was assigned there during Operation Plumbbob, one of the most intense series of nuclear weapons tests in U.S. history. The series included 29 detonations, some of them extremely powerful, such as the 44-kiloton Big Smoky Blast. Paul flew observation planes directly through the fallout clouds and logged many hours over ground zero while thousands of troops remained in trenches below. These tests were part of the infamous human radiation experiments in which soldiers were deliberately exposed to fallout with little or no protection in order to study the effects of nuclear blasts. Paul was breathing that contaminated air for extended periods of time. When he returned to Fort Ord, he was no longer the same man. His skin erupted in strange black moles and blotches. He began chain smoking up to 4 packs of cigarettes a day, a habit he had never had before. He drank black coffee obsessively, his hands trembled uncontrollably, and he lost a significant amount of weight. His teeth darkened so severely that he eventually had to have them all removed and replaced with dentures. He suffered from constant headaches, overwhelming fatigue, and recurring illness. To friends and family, he spoke vaguely about an impending special assignment that he could not discuss in detail. He began giving away personal belongings as though he were preparing to leave forever. His brother Carl later recalled that Paul seemed deeply paranoid and felt as though someone was watching him. Was this the result of an acute or chronic radiation sickness? Could it have been connected to early mind control experiments similar to those in MK Ultra, which combined drugs, hypnosis, and sometimes radiation? Or was it simply the stress of classified work breaking an otherwise perfect soldier? Whatever the cause, the change was dramatic and deeply unsettling. On the evening of July 10, 1958, which was a Thursday, Paul told fellow officers at Fort Ord that he was going to Monterey, just 1 mile away, for a quick drink. He wore civilian clothes, a white shirt, and khaki pants. He climbed into his red and white Mercury convertible, although some sources mention a 1956 Chevrolet, adding yet another small layer of confusion, and then he drove off base. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. The following day, he failed to report for duty. The Army recorded him as absent without leave. 30 days later, they officially changed his status to deserter. Serious searches were not launched immediately, and the family received only minimal notification at first. Then, on August 17, 1958, more than 5 weeks after he vanished, a California Fish and Game warden discovered Paul's car in a remote and desolate section of Death Valley National Monument. The keys remained in the ignition and the gas tank still held fuel, but the engine had completely burnt out, as though the vehicle had been driven at maximum speed for hours through extreme heat. An empty suitcase sat inside the car. Most disturbingly, Paul's dog tags, military identification, bank books, and flight logs were all missing. A scattering of cigarette butts lay nearby, even though Paul had not been a smoker before his symptoms began. A gas receipt inside the car placed the vehicle in Mojave, roughly 350 miles east of Fort Ord, at some point during those missing weeks. Even stranger, a rancher reported seeing the same car being driven through Death Valley about 4 weeks after Paul's disappearance, somewhere in mid-August, but the driver was a man wearing a full Army uniform. Paul had left Fort Ord in civilian clothing. Who was behind the wheel in uniform, and why would anyone remain in such an inhospitable place? When Paul's family finally arrived at Fort Ord to collect his personal belongings, they found his barracks room already completely stripped. His uniforms, flight helmet, and every other item were gone. The Army claimed the items had been shipped home, but the family never received anything. It was as though Paul Whipkey had been systematically erased from existence. The Army's handling of the case was at best disorganized and at worst deliberately obstructive. At first, they labeled Paul a deserter and did not begin searching for his body for 9 full months. Carl Whipkey, Paul's brother and himself a veteran, refused to accept the official story. He filed FOIA requests, interviewed witnesses, and pursued every lead he could find. Through his efforts, Carl uncovered several troubling details. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Lewis, Paul's commanding officer, had personally observed Paul meeting several times with plainclothes men who flashed military identification, but refused to name their agency. After those meetings, Paul became withdrawn and rigid in his behavior. Lewis believed the men were CIA recruiters looking for skilled pilots to join covert operations. Carl also learned that Paul had told him in January 1958 about a special assignment that would make a name for himself, but the conversation was abruptly cut short. And then another eerie coincidence emerged. Paul's best friend, Lieutenant Charlie Guess, vanished on July 22, 1958, only 12 days after Paul. Guess's plane disappeared, and although wreckage was eventually located in 1959, the serial number on the recovered parts did not match the aircraft he had been flying. Was this pure coincidence? In 1982, after years of pressure from Carl, the Army Board for Correction of Military Records held a 3-day hearing. The board ultimately ruled that Paul had died the day after his disappearance, and that his death occurred in the line of duty rather than as a result of misconduct. They issued an honorable service certificate but provided no detailed explanation. Earlier, in a bizarre clerical error, the Army had briefly listed him as killed in action in Laos, and backdated the death to 1958 before quickly retracting the statement. Laos was a country Paul had never been deployed to. Carl remained convinced that the government knew exactly what had happened to his brother. He believed the desert scene had been staged long after Paul vanished and that someone else had driven the car there. Congressional representatives, including John Murtha, became involved at various points, yet no concrete answers ever emerged. In 1991, the case gained national attention when Unsolved Mysteries aired an episode on it during Season 3, Episode 21. Viewers submitted numerous tips, but none led to a resolution. Carl continued his search for the truth until his death on November 19, 2019, still without closure for the family. Now, let's examine the leading theories in detail. Theory 1. Radiation poisoning and government cover-up. This remains the most grounded explanation based on documented facts. Paul's symptoms, the black moles, severe tooth decay, tremors, and rapid weight loss, are classic signs of acute and chronic radiation exposure. He flew observation missions directly through the fallout clouds of Operation Plumbbob. If he was suffering from radiation sickness and deteriorating rapidly, he may have become a liability to the Army. Staging a desert disappearance would have allowed officials to avoid a public scandal or lawsuit over the human radiation experiments conducted on the soldiers. The stripping of his room could have been an attempt to remove contaminated personal items. Unconfirmed reports even suggest elevated radiation readings inside the abandoned car. Carl initially leaned towards this explanation. But the question still remains, why choose Death Valley specifically? And why was no body ever recovered despite the harsh environment preserving remains for decades? Theory 2 is the CIA Black Ops recruitment theory. Carl Whipkey became convinced that his brother had been quietly recruited for a classified CIA program, possibly an early version of Air America operations in Laos or Vietnam. Paul's skills as a pilot made him an ideal candidate for reconnaissance flights over the Ho Chi Minh Trail or other covert missions in Southeast Asia. The quote-unquote special assignment he mentioned, the meetings with plainclothed men, and his sudden personality shift all support this idea. Carl theorized that Paul drove to Mojave, checked into a motel under an alias, met with agents, and was flown out from Edwards Air Force Base. The car was then planted in Death Valley as a deliberate diversion. The erroneous killed in action designation may have been an accidental slip that revealed more than intended. Many such missions carried zero survivability probabilities, meaning Paul's body would never have been returned. Evidence includes the documented recruiter meetings, Paul's behavior change afterward, and the perfect alignment of his pilot qualifications with the early CIA operations in the region. Theory 3. Mind control, nerve gas, or secret experiments. During the same period, the CIA was actively running MK-Ultra, which involved experiments with hypnosis, LSD, radiation, and other methods, sometimes on unwitting military personnel. Paul's paranoia, drastic habit changes, and physical symptoms could fit someone subjected to such programs. Alternatively, he may have witnessed or participated in nerve gas tests at nearby Dugway Proving Ground and become a security risk. In this scenario, he was silenced to prevent leaks. Theory 4. Foul play, espionage, or voluntary disappearance. Less likely possibilities include Soviet agents targeting Paul if he had been involved in sensitive activities or Paul faking his own death to enter intelligence work. His character, however, makes voluntary desertion or defection highly improbable. Which theory resonates most with you? Drop your top pick and your reasoning in the comments below. I will reply to the most thoughtful ones. More than 65 years later, Paul Whipkey's case remains officially unsolved. No body has ever been found, and no definitive explanation has been provided. A memorial marker stands at Ligonier Valley Cemetery in Pennsylvania, but the grave beneath it is empty. Carl Whipkey passed away still seeking answers, yet his persistence ensured the story was never completely forgotten. Interestingly, similar vanishings have occurred at or near military installations during the same era. West Point cadet Richard Cox disappeared in 1950 under mysterious circumstances, and other Fort Ord cases in later decades showed unsettling patterns. Whether coincidence or something deeper, these incidents remind us of the human cost of Cold War secrecy. Men used as tools, discarded when inconvenient, and families left in limbo. Today, declassification continues slowly. Perhaps one day a key document will surface and bring clarity. Until then, the questions linger. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which mystery we should tackle next. Until next time, stay curious.